You planted it in spring, you watered it, you watched the spot every single day, expecting it to fill out, to bush up, to finally look like the picture on the plant tag. And nothing happened. Maybe it grew an inch, maybe it just sat there, the exact same size it was the day you put it in the ground, while everything around it took off. Here's what nobody tells you when you buy a perennial. Most of them are not actually trying to grow tall or wide in year one. They are doing something invisible underground that takes priority over everything you can see. But that explains maybe 2 of the 7 reasons your plants are stalling. The other 5 are mistakes. Common ones, the kind almost every gardener makes at some point, and the kind that are completely fixable once you know what to look for. So if you've got a perennial bed that looks exactly like it did last month, stick around. By the end of this video, you're going to know exactly which of these 7 reasons applies to your garden and exactly what to do about it. If you're new here, hit subscribe before we get started. This channel is built around real, practical answers to the problems gardeners actually run into, not generic advice you've already heard 100 times. Let's get into it. Reason 1. You planted it too deep. This is one of the most common mistakes in home gardening, and it's almost never intentional. People dig a hole, drop the plant in, and the soil ends up sitting higher on the stem than it should, often without anyone noticing. Here's why it matters so much. The crown of most perennials, the point where roots transition into stem, needs to sit right at or just slightly above soil level. When that crown gets buried even an inch or two too deep, the plant has to spend energy pushing new growth up through extra soil before it can even start photosynthesizing properly. Some plants tolerate this reasonably well. Others, like peonies, lavender, and many ornamental grasses, will sulk for years if planted too deep, sometimes never recovering fully. It happens for a few predictable reasons. Mulch gets piled up around the base over time and slowly buries the crown. Soil settles after planting and nobody goes back to check the level. Or the original hole was simply dug too deep to begin with. The fix is straightforward, if a little nerve-wracking the first time you do it. Gently brush away soil and mulch from the base of the stem until you can clearly see the crown. If it's noticeably below the surrounding soil line, that plant likely needs to be lifted in early spring or fall and reset at the correct depth. It feels like a big intervention. For a plant that's been struggling for 2 or 3 years, it's often the single thing that finally lets it take off. Reason 2, it's still building roots, not top growth. This is the one almost nobody believes until they dig down and see it for themselves. There's an old saying among nursery growers, first year sleep, second year creep, third year leap. It sounds like a cute rhyme, but it describes something real. In its first year in your soil, a perennial is spending the overwhelming majority of its energy underground, building a root system strong enough to support everything that comes after. Think about it from the plant's perspective. It just got pulled out of a nursery pot, where its roots were circling in a tight, comfortable, controlled environment. Now it's sitting in your actual soil with your actual drainage, your actual nutrient levels, competing with whatever else is nearby. Before it can afford to push energy into new leaves and taller stems, it has to anchor itself. It has to find water reliably. It has to figure out your soil. You won't see this process. That's exactly why it's so frustrating. There's no visible signal that anything is happening at all. But if you gently dig at the edge of the root ball in fall, you'll usually find white, healthy new roots extending out further than where you originally planted it. The plant is working. It's just not working where you can see it. What you can do here isn't to force top growth, it's to support what's already happening. Keep the soil consistently moist, not soggy, through that first season. Skip the high nitrogen fertilizer that pushes leafy growth, because that actually competes with root development rather than supporting it. Be patient through year 1. Most perennials genuinely do not show their real size until year 2 or 3. Reason 3, it's not getting the light the tag said it need. This one sounds obvious, and that's exactly why it gets overlooked so often. Plant tags say full sun or part shade, and most people read that once at the garden center and never think about it again. But your yard changes. A tree you planted 5 years ago has a canopy now. A fence went up. A neighbor's addition changed where the afternoon shadow falls. The spot that was full sun when you planted that coneflower 3 years ago might genuinely be getting 4 hours of direct light now instead of the 6 to 8 it actually needs. Underlit perennials don't usually die outright. They just exist in a kind of survival mode, minimal new growth, fewer flowers, stems that stretch and lean toward whatever light source they can find, which is its own visible clue that something's wrong. Spend one full day actually watching the spot, checking it every couple of hours, and counting how many hours of direct, unobstructed sun it gets. Not filtered light through branches, direct sun. If a sun-loving perennial is getting under 4 hours, that's very likely your answer. The plant isn't sick. It isn't struggling with the soil. It simply doesn't have the fuel to grow the way it's built to grow. Reason 4. Your soil is compacted. This is the one that's hardest to diagnose because everything above the soil line can look perfectly normal, while the real problem sits invisible below it. Compacted soil has had its natural pore structure crushed down by foot traffic, by heavy rain pounding the same spot for years, by construction equipment from when the house was built, sometimes just by the weight of repeated watering on clay-heavy ground. When soil compacts, roots physically cannot push through it. Water sits on the surface instead of soaking in, or it runs off before the plant can use it. Oxygen, which roots genuinely need, can't reach down to where it's required. A simple way to check is the screwdriver test. Take a regular screwdriver and try pushing it into the soil near your struggling plant. If it slides in with light pressure, your soil structure is fine. If you have to lean your weight into it and it barely moves, you're dealing with compaction, and that's very likely limiting root growth more than anything else you've tried to fix. The solution isn't fast, and there's no way around that. Working a generous layer of compost into the surrounding soil, repeated over a season or two, gradually rebuilds structure as earthworms and organic matter open the soil back up. A core aerator can help on a larger scale. What doesn't work is tilling once and expecting it to be solved. Compacted soil, especially clay, tends to reform unless organic matter is added consistently over time. Reason 5. It's competing with something bigger. Nearby perennials are quietly fighting for resources constantly, and the competition isn't always obvious just by looking at the surface. A small perennial planted near a mature shrub, an established tree, or even a particularly vigorous neighboring perennial is very likely losing a below-ground battle for water and nutrients that you can't see happening. Tree roots especially can extend 2 to 3 times wider than the canopy above, quietly running straight underneath garden beds that look like they have nothing to do with the tree at all. The signs tend to be subtle at first. The plant nearest the competition stays noticeably smaller than an identical plant elsewhere in the yard. It wilts faster on hot days, even with regular watering. Growth seems to lean or stretch away from the bigger plant, as if it's trying to put distance between itself and the competition. If you suspect this is happening, dig a small test hole partway between the two plants. Thick, fibrous roots running directly through that space, especially close to the surface, are usually a clear sign of competition. In genuinely difficult spots like this, root barriers can help, or simply choosing tougher, more drought-tolerant perennials for that specific area instead of fighting an uphill battle with a plant that needed more resources than that spot could realistically provide. Reason 6. You're overwatering. This feels backwards to a lot of people, especially anyone who grew up being told to water plants generously and often. But more perennials are stunted by too much water than by too little. When soil stays consistently wet, roots are denied the oxygen they need to function properly. Without oxygen, roots essentially begin to suffocate, and a plant with damaged or oxygen-starved roots cannot take up nutrients efficiently no matter how much fertilizer you apply on top. The plant ends up stuck in a kind of limbo, alive but never thriving, never really growing the way it should. The signs can look confusingly similar to underwatering, which is exactly why so many people respond by watering even more. Yellowing leaves, wilting despite damp soil, and stunted overall growth can all point to either problem, so checking the actual soil moisture matters more than guessing from the leaves alone. Push a finger 2 to 3 inches into the soil near the base of the plant. If it's still damp from your last watering, hold off entirely before watering again. Most established perennials genuinely do better with a deep, infrequent watering, once a week in normal conditions, rather than a light daily sprinkle that keeps the surface wet without ever encouraging roots to grow deeper in search of moisture. Reason 7. ET needs to be divide. This one feels counterintuitive at first. A plant that isn't growing well, and your answer is to dig it up and cut it into pieces, but for many mature perennials, this is exactly what's needed. Over several years, the center of many clump-forming perennials, hostas, daylilies, irises, and several others, gradually becomes congested and woody. The plant has, in a sense, outgrown its own space underground, with roots crowding so tightly together that none of them can access enough water or nutrients individually. New growth slows, flowering decreases, and the whole plant can start to look tired even though nothing external has changed. The clue to look for is a donut shape, vigorous green growth around the outer edge of the clump, with a noticeably weak, sparse, or even dead patch right in the center. That's a near certain sign the plant has simply outgrown itself and needs to be divided to recover. The process itself is more forgiving than people expect. Dig up the entire clump, and using a sharp spade or even just your hands, depending on the plant, separate it into smaller sections, each with its own healthy roots attached. Replant those sections with adequate space between them, and in most cases, you'll see noticeably stronger growth the very next season, not just from the original plant, but from however many new plants you just created for free. 7 reasons, and if you've gone through this list honestly, at least one of them probably explains exactly what's happening in your own garden right now. The good news in all of this is that almost none of these problems are permanent. A plant that's too deep can be reset. Compacted soil can be rebuilt. A crowded clump can be divided into several thriving plants instead of one struggling one. None of this requires starting over, it just requires understanding what's actually going on beneath the surface. If this video helped you figure out what's been holding your garden back, subscribe right now, because next week we're tackling another problem most gardeners run into but never quite get a straight answer for. Hit the bell so you don't miss it. And before you go, drop a comment below. Tell me which of these 7 reasons matches what's happening with your perennials, and tell me what state or zone you're gardening in. I read every single comment, and they genuinely shape what this channel covers next. Go check on that plant. You might already know exactly what to do.